Yellowstone National Park. The park superintendent, Cam Shawley, is on the phone with us. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Hey, good morning, Glenn and Nick. Hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, sir. Thanks for being here.
I just, first off, I worry about the psychological effect of the, of course, the grizzly bears and the buffalo that haven't had their hugs from the tourists yet this year. How are they doing?
Well, first of all, you got a lot of people working really hard on this.
I understand.
Park's in great shape. We've been closed now for 5 weeks. When we went into the closure, we listened to, the park sits in 3 states, as you all know.
Mm-hmm.
The majority of it is in Wyoming. We had a lot of consensus from our state governors, our health officials, communities, and counties that closing 5 weeks ago was a good way to go. And what I've seen, in the last week especially, is a real substantial shift off of that, and people's perspectives starting to change substantially. I'm not positive where the stressors of the economics start to override the fear of the virus, but I think we're approaching that right now. There's $1 billion spent by tourists in local economies within 60 miles of Yellowstone and Grand Teton last year alone, and so it's a big deal for people. We've talked to about 600 business owners and civic leaders just in the last week here in Yellowstone. A lot of perspectives. People want to be careful. They don't want to take unnecessary risks, but we also need to get the economies rolling, and that's something we feel very important about, partnering with the states and the counties and the communities to do that in a way that's smart and safe, but gets us rolling as soon as possible.
And at this point, do you have a plan for a reopening, or a projected date, or even what reopening might look like, what facilities you might start with?
So as you can imagine, there are a number of divergent opinions on when to open and how to open.
Sure.
One thing that's consistent is everybody ultimately wants us to open. I think that's very safe to say. We're working with Montana and Wyoming. The governor's been a terrific partner, and his team with us, trying to navigate through what that might look like and when it might be appropriate. So we're balancing changing restrictions in states. 96% of the park is in Wyoming, but 3 of the 5 entrances are in Montana. Got a small portion in Idaho. And so what we're trying to do is reconcile the 3 states, the major counties the park sits in and around, and the communities, to try to figure out what a phased approach to opening might look like. And so this hasn't been decided, but just so you know, what we're kind of thinking is, we'll have plenty of time for more conversations, is probably some type of soft opening with limited services, and I would say that sooner than later. I'm not going to give a date exactly, but we are looking to do something as quickly as we can, as long as it's safe to do so. And then we would kind of migrate with limited services, probably obviously the roads, restrooms, some of the clinics, maybe some limited food service and that kind of thing, gas stations. And then we would start to kind of monitor that with the states, and what does that influx of tourism look like as far as impact, not only within the park, but within the gateway communities in the states around us, and start to ease into opening more and more facilities as we go through time. And the plan is geared to be as flexible as possible, and if it's safe, we can accelerate and ramp up. If it's not, we have the ability to contract.
Well, Mr. Shaw, some of those places that when I think of Yellowstone, there's so many places that people go to social distance. That's the point of visiting the park, is to get out there. But there's other places, like they want to see Old Faithful erupt, or other places like that where people like to gather around and look, isn't that place amazing? And all sorts of people come gathering together. How, in those gathering places, do you keep people far enough apart?
That's a great question. And to your point, even though this is a large park, there are obviously places in the park that are very popular, people travel to. Old Faithful, you mentioned, Grand Canyon, the Yellowstone, Lamar Valley, those types of places. That's a challenge. I mean, we have a lot of mitigation ideas and actions that we're working on for facilities, like how many people can come into a visitor center or a store or those types of things. But when you talk about 11,000 people on a boardwalk at Old Faithful every day with no real control point, we're going to rely on partnering with the public to adhere to whatever the national, local, state health guidance is. And there's no way we're going to be the social distance police in places like that. I'm just not going to put staff at risk. It would be crazy for me to put an employee in the middle of 2,000 people that we're deciding to ignore that type of thing. So we're going to do a lot of messaging, signage. We'll do our best to manage that, but there may be some areas where that might be more difficult than others.
And Mr. Shawley, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned employees, NPS employees and folks who work for concessions companies like Xanterra. I mean, when they're in the summer, even just the seasonal ones, that's got to be a big chunk of that $1 billion that gets spent in some of the gateway communities around the park. How has the delayed opening impacted those employees personally? And then what is the financial impact of some of those seasonal folks not being brought on?
Well, so we have an amazing team here, both in the Park Service and our business partners in the park. We, on a normal year, between all of us, bring in about 4,000 employees seasonally. Obviously, those employees run the restaurants, the hotels, the visitor centers, public safety, and things like that. What we've decided going into this is that we will only bring on the number of employees that we have. So a lot of these employees normally live in dorms and share bathrooms and things like that. So we've tried to minimize the risk going into this by only hiring the number of people that we can put one person to a room. So for us, like a 2-bedroom apartment, or might have normally 2 people in it in a year. We're only putting 1. So the good news is if an employee gets sick, we have the ability to isolate them. The bad news is it severely constrains the number of employees that we bring on. So we're probably going to bring on about 1,000 in total in the next, when we develop the opening timeline versus 4, and that'll allow us to open up some limited facilities and see how it goes. It's an impact. We had most of those people hired. Xanterra, Delaware North, our business partners had people hired. We've had to put people on hold and obviously put them in a holding pattern. We do have a good batch coming on in preparation so that we're ready to go. What I didn't want to do is wait and then everybody agrees let's open, and then we have a 4-week lag to try to get people hired and brought in here. So we are bringing in a number of staff to be ready. It just won't be ready at full speed, and then we'll have the ability to bring more and more on as time goes on if it's safe to do so.
And I wanted to ask you, too, how closed is the park? I mean, all the facilities, of course, but are your roads open? I mean, if my folks want to drive over from Boise to the Pahaska area, are they able to do that at this point?
No, it's closed right now.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we're allowing and first of all, we just got done plowing the roads in the interior. If there's a silver lining to this, this last month, that was a shoulder season for us, and so the businesses weren't most businesses weren't making tons of money in March and early April, but that's starting to change now.
It's getting to the point where they are opening up, and so I imagine there's going to be a little more anxiety from some of those business owners and communities.
And we're working with all of our communities listening, and we will reconcile, and we will do it right and get it open. And, I appreciate everybody's partnership and involvement in this very complex situation.
Yellowstone National Park Superintendent Cam Shawley, thank you for coming on the program. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thanks.